questions afterwards. Okay, so I want to thank Photo Shelter, Pro Photo Daily, American Photography, Epson, and Archive Magazine for always being by our side. I also want to shout out to Jay, who is the tech guy, who without him, things would run a lot smoother, but we still need him. And I always want, Jay is really the man who runs the gig. So I appreciate that very much, Jay. So we will have Mr. Patterson take over and share your screen, and it's all yours, Patrick.
Thank you.
You're on, Patrick.
Thank you. This is Galina. Galina was born into war. She survived Nazi occupation. She survived Holodomor, which is the Great Famine. And in February, she listened to Russian tanks crossing her fields. Her remaining life will likely be surrounded by war. This is the case for so many Ukrainians. About 2 kilometers from her front porch, a burned out Russian tank sits at the entrance of her village.
And how did you come to find this lady?
So this is traveling through in the Chernihiv region, stopping in different villages. When I usually see people who are congregating around a city center or a village center, I'll stop and just kind of navigate my way through the city or the village or town that I'm in. So this is a week after the war started. This is at the Ukraine-Poland border. And originally, one of my interests in going here was to get a better understanding of how and why Poland was responding the way they were. During the same time frame, in northern Ethiopia, there had been 500,000 deaths due to famine and to war. But yet, on the mainstream news, conversation was very limited on that. And in the beginning, trying to get a better understanding of how we can respond equitably to crises and wars, and responding as global citizens. This is on a transfer bus at the border that I boarded, not knowing where I would end up. Ultimately, I ended up in Pashimashil. This is a mother holding her daughter, and her son is sitting to the left.
And Patrick, you're traveling on your own now?
I am, correct. While at the Medica border crossing, I encountered two mothers traveling with 3 young infants and two companion pets. So they were trying to get a ride to Warsaw. So ultimately, I let them pile into the back of the car, and we drove them from the Ukraine border to Warsaw. And so this is one moment, as I was driving, I just noticed that for the first time in the entire trip there, with them in the car, it was quiet. So as I was driving down the highway, I managed to take this photograph from the driver's seat. And technically, it breaks all the rules compositionally and what's in the frame, but there's so much emotion in this image for me. The small hand on the bottom right of the child that you notice maybe after the fact, and something that I thought about after this is that these 2 women traveled from Kivrig in the east all the way to the border with just a couple suitcases, 3 kids and their 2 dogs. And they navigated that trip on their own. And they felt comfortable enough with us that they finally decided to go to sleep. So this image is this is probably one of the more emotional images that I've taken on this trip, on this journey.
That looked like sheer exhaustion. It
Absolutely,
wasn't even
absolutely.
sleep, right? It wasn't sleeping, it was exhaustion, right?
And something that you continue to come across, this is before I made it into Ukraine, is I would notice that the expressions on specifically children's faces, you could tell who had experienced significant trauma and maybe who had not. I always just kind of use the term like this catatonic stare on the faces of these children that were waiting at the border.
So Patrick, now you said other folks. Are you with other photographers now?
On this particular trip in March, I was working with a Ukrainian photographer who is based in Poland. So we did work together for the first 10 days. And then I returned back to the States. And then when I returned, I worked solo.
Do you have do you prefer one over the other?
I prefer to work solo for sure.
Yeah. Okay.
This is Victor and Boryanka. So this is after I've made my trip to Ukraine. I'm working on my own here. Victor lived in a multi-story apartment block that was hit by a Russian missile shortly after the initial invasion. He still lives in this home to this day. I've been back and I have revisited Victor. The story that Victor shared with me is he walking late in February to get water. He was stopped by Russian soldiers outside of his apartment block and at gunpoint was ordered to remove all of his clothing so that they could inspect his body for Nazi tattoos. And before the war, Victor did not drink. He was retired. He is retired. And the first thing that Victor does now when he wakes up is he tries to drink as much alcohol as he can in the very first part of the day so that he can forget the experiences that he went through living under Russian occupation. And for me, my journey in Ukraine is more about the impact of war, the impact what it does to people and the environment. Not so much covering the actual fighting. For lack of better words, I don't want to glamorize war. And for me, I made the decision that I wanted to tell the stories, or I wanted to share the stories of the people and to show the impact what war does to community.
In that vein, Patrick, are you working now with a fixer to find these folks? And do you have contact with those two women with all the little kids?
I do have contact with the women with the kids. I keep it in contact with a lot of people that I've met in Ukraine. I think for me, all the people that I've photographed, for the most part, I've built some type of relationship with them. I've returned on multiple trips to work with them, bringing them humanitarian supplies if I was traveling to, to the east, I would reach out and ask if they needed anything from Kyiv before I would leave. But yes, definitely, I'm working with people, Ukrainians that are fixers or providing translation for me. And this is the ritual across Ukraine. This is in the city center of Kyiv. This is at a soldier's funeral.
You know, we've seen these images over time. It's always done with the most dignity. The funerals, the churches, everything is always done proper.
And this is the soldier's mother behind the casket here, who was being treated by paramedics. She had passed out during his service. And this is city center of Kyiv. They moved the casket to where Maidan took place, and thousands upon thousands of people gathered around the city. And like so many soldiers, some are part of the military because they're military soldiers. They went to military school. They wanted to be a soldier. And for many, when Russia invaded Ukraine, many chose to go and enlist. Lawyers, actors, filmmakers. This is Anne, and she is at the morgue to pick up her husband Oleg, who was one of Ukraine's premier filmmakers, and he had worked on a couple of Zelensky's earlier movies. But he wasn't a soldier. He was a filmmaker. He was an artist, and he felt that it was his requirement to put down his camera and pick up a gun and go to the front and fight. And he paid with his life. This is Anne at St. Michael's.
And Patrick, how did you come upon this particular story?
I had contact with Anne earlier on, before her husband was killed. He was killed shortly before Christmas in Bakhmut. And so we connected after his death, and she invited me to join her to the city morgue to pick up Oleg. So I spent my day with her and her family. And just like Oleg, this is Demilia, and he's a lawyer, and the war came, and he learned how to become a soldier. He shared with me some of the most impactful words that I think that I've heard in the last year that I've been in Ukraine. And he talked about being human and his moral compass and how he values life and what he knows. He knows what it means to be human. And so he shared with me earlier on in the war, outside of Hostomel, which is a suburb outside of Kyiv, a young Russian soldier crossed his path, and very, very close to him, meters away. And he remembers raising his gun and putting the bead on this soldier, and he followed him across the street, and he couldn't bring himself to squeeze the trigger, as he would say. And as the soldier kind of disappeared into the buildings across the street, once he passed, he lowered his weapon and he said he couldn't do it. And a short time after that, the big push, the big storm happened, and this same soldier was part of that storm. And likely that same soldier killed some of his fellow soldiers. And he says he lives with that, thinking that if he would have pulled the trigger, he could have saved the lives of some of his fellow soldiers, but he chose not to. And in wartime, for him, being a lawyer and not being somebody who's a trained military professional, he says the only time that he's able to really pull the trigger is during the storms or during the intense fighting. But that personal one-on-one experience that soldiers can have with each other when you are expected to take the life of another human being, he wasn't able to do it. And what's important about that story for me is that through propaganda, through Telegram channels, through lots of videos from younger soldiers, they don't want to be fighting either, but it's a different narrative than his story, and he's speaking as the wise elder amongst a lot of young soldiers. He talks about what it's like to live after knowing that you've taken another life, even knowing that Russia has invaded Ukraine. So I think for me, it was a really special story that he was willing to share, and not many soldiers would share that story.
And do you think it's the wisdom of age or the education level? Like, what gives this gentleman, that wisdom? Like, can you peel back the onion as it relates to this guy? Because you're older, you have kids, you see the world certainly different. What was it for him that you think, that he shared that with you?
For him, he talked about family being important, relationships that you have with people, and being human and understanding other people. And I can speak for myself. This has changed me as a person. So I can only imagine how that impacts people who are holding a gun or expected to kill. He's a family man, and I'm certain that when he looked at this young Russian soldier crossing the street, he thought of his own family, his own son. But to say that in a time where it's celebrated so much at every Russian death that here's a soldier who's part of Azov who's saying that, yes, I find it difficult to pull the trigger to take another life. So I think going back to why I'm there making photographs and recording is that I went to record a different narrative of war and of the people who are impacted from it. And it's not just the civilians. You know, Demilio was a civilian up until the war. He was a lawyer in Kyiv and put down his law books and picked up a rifle. And this is him and Ivano-Frankivsk at the Philharmonic. He was receiving treatment at a very special military hospital, or a hospital only treating military soldiers that originally opened up about a month before the war as a high-end cosmetic surgical facility. And so they quickly transitioned to a nonprofit hospital treating Ukrainian soldiers. They will take other people if they need the treatment, but they focus on nerve damage and limb replacements. So, and all the healthcare providers at these hospitals, including psychologists, are also displaced physicians from the war, from the east, from Mariupol and Kharkiv region. But this is maybe this image explains why to answer your question, right? Here he is at the Philharmonic after being injured in Bakhmut. This is who he is as a person. This is Alexandra, born and raised in Izum. He lives on the end of the street from where Chechen rebels had taken over a school and used as their headquarters. And I'm including this image in here because everybody has different outcomes in each of these villages and cities and throughout Ukraine. And for Alexandra, he's alive, his family's alive. But what he did do is he stood on his street and he would watch Russian soldiers force Ukrainians to load the dead into the backs of trucks that would ultimately end up at the mass graves in Izum. This might look like two separate apartments. It's actually one apartment that was split into two. And that came from a delayed action bomb. And so what that will do is it will penetrate multiple floors before it detonates. So at this particular time on March 9th, a Russian bomber was flying overhead right on the next river there. This is a view from one of the top floors looking out.
And Patrick, what are you shooting with?
I shoot with a Leica monochrome. This is also from the same building. So as you look out from the piano, that's going to be the split in the gap in the building.
We've seen a lot of photographers getting well, the word slips my mind. The cameras that fly, a drone.
Drones, yeah.
Ever think of using that, Patrick?
I haven't. No, I've always been one to for me personally, I find that the more cameras, the more gear that I use, the more disruptive it is. I like to I carry one backup camera body, and I shoot with a 35mm prime lens on a monochrome body. This is Misha. This is outside that split apartment building. And on the morning around 8 a.m., Misha had finished making porridge for his family. Him and a little bit more than 60 people were living in the basement below this building. And so the way it was set up downstairs is Misha's an electrician, and so he chose to stay in the electrical room below ground. It was more kind of that room was more of a private room, and then the rest of the rooms below ground in the basement were all connected. But there were over 60 people who were seeking shelter during the day, and that night, this is where they were living shortly after the Russian invasion happened. So this is March 9th. They finished up eating breakfast, and his 3-year-old granddaughter, who he calls his little Irina, wanted tea. So he said that he would go make tea. They lived on the 3rd floor, and on his balcony he had that's where he would cook. So he would go up to the 3rd floor balcony and cook, and then bring the food back down. So as he stepped outside of the electrical room door to walk up the steps to the 1st floor, his wife Natalia said, "Wait, Misha, I'll go with you." And that was the last words that he heard from his wife. The bomb landed, and in his mind, he said it was 1,000 explosions in his eyes at once. He was knocked unconscious, and when he woke later in the morning, he was able to free himself. And then he realized that he had lost his entire family in that explosion. So within a matter of seconds, Misha lost every living relative that he has, 7 in all, in that electrical room with him. He lost his two grandchildren, one 3 and one 10. He lost his wife, his daughter, son-in-law, his aunt. This happened on March 9th. And on April 12th and 13th, we need to understand that Izum was occupied. So he was able to use his hands and some primitive tools and shovels to remove some of the bricks, to remove his family. So he was able to remove the last body on the 13th. Many of the people in this building would find themselves in the mass graves in Izum. 54 people died in that blast, or 54 bodies were actually recovered in that blast. There's still some that are missing. All but 12 of those bodies would find themselves in the mass graves in Izum.
So Patrick, when you come to, a building like that and you see that, I mean, what's your plan of attack, to go there and just to see if people are there and stay there and get all these human interest stories? Like, how do you approach that?
I approach everything as organically as I can. I try not to put up any expectations. I establish, if there are people who are there. If sometimes I come to buildings and there's no one there. And on this particular day, I had made arrangements to meet with Misha. So Misha was expecting me. And I was able to make contact with Misha through a contact that I have from a physician at a hospital in Western Ukraine. So it's you kind of, or at least I start filing all of my contacts, where people are from, how they can help me in certain regions of Ukraine. So this is how I was able to meet and spend time with Misha and hear his story.
So-
And then, after that, just being respectful in the space that I'm in. I know that I'm walking through people's homes that are no longer living. This photograph on the ground is from inside a resident of that apartment building. And so this is what's left of this woman in the flesh.
And how long did you stay at the apartment building?
I visited. I spent a lot of time in Izum. In this particular apartment, I think I visited this street maybe 3 or 4 times on 3 or 4 different trips.
And you tell your fixers, I'm looking for this. I'm looking for in-depth stories. I'm looking to speak with people. So their connections, one place helps the other, huh?
Yeah. So maybe I how I make contact with people in Ukraine is I especially with in Izum at this particular apartment. I'm friends with the CEO who owns a surgical hospital in Western Ukraine, who I was introduced to from a woman through Pacifica Radio in Provincetown, Massachusetts. Stas speaks English pretty well, so he was able to connect me with Stas. I'm going to Izum. I'm going to spend 3 days in the Kharkiv region and in the Donbass region. Can you find me anybody that wants to share their story? And then you just wait, and very quickly you start getting these responses back, and you pick where you want to go. So in this case, these graves are some of the mass graves in Izum, where most of the people in that apartment block perished and ultimately ended up being buried here. And what's really hard to really fathom is that all around these graves are what I call them tank bunkers, where the tanks, there's holes that are dug and the tanks drive in reverse into the hole. All around this entire forest is also mined. This was a very strong Russian base in this forest. There's a large tank battalion that was stationed here the entire time they were occupying Izum. So these Russian soldiers are living in the forest that they're burying the masses in, that they're killing, and they're living amongst these graves and these bodies. 332 on some of these markers, you'll just have a number. Some of them will have a name and a date of birth and the day they died. A lot of times, these bodies are pulled out by long, like rope type material, pretty strategically, because they were also, some of these bodies were also had mines on them. So if they were moved, they would blow up, detonate. So it was a very delicate process to remove each body, from recording the evidence of the war crimes, who they were, and then sometimes the contents that they had with them when they were killed were also buried in that hole as well. Family album in that same apartment block in Izum.
Through all that destruction, there's a beautifully well-kept book, right? How that happens.
Absolutely. This is sometime after all of the bodies had been exhumed. And so I was taken back just by, we talk about how the impact war has on landscape and environment. These are all surgical gloves and gowns and masks that are just thrown into this hole with a coffin. There's a mattress behind the coffin and a vodka bottle on top of the coffin. None of this was cleaned up. This is how it sits today. And in addition to the mass graves in this forest, there is an actual cemetery as well. Some of the other things that I would think about when I would walk into someone's home, that I knew that they were no longer with us or they had left, is that the eyes on the walls would follow me, right? These photographs, like this child's portrait on the wall, someone hung that there. Someone loved this child, and someone still playing vinyl records. And this is in Kharkiv. A missile had hit this particular apartment, killing the people who live here. So food still in the refrigerator. The kitchen table still had food on it. But I wanted to record and document what things looked like. Things that were strategically put places with meaning. And I think sometimes we can walk by these things very quickly and not stop and just take a moment to look at what people appreciated and loved. So for me, going back to, why I'm making these photographs, and for me, it's showing the impact of war and trying to continue the narrative of Russian aggression and Russian war crimes. This is a kitchen sink and tabletop. And so as I started to kind of realize pretty consistently across all buildings that I had entered or spent time in, Russian soldiers were taking everything from the thermostat on the wall to kitchen sinks. So Russian soldiers had literally taken the kitchen sink from this flat. But also, there's still food in this pot, and I think about how much borscht was made in this pot. How much, the amount of bread that was cut on this cutting block and the sunflower on the mat there. But these folks as well did not make it. They were killed in a Russian air attack.
Yeah, so Patrick, I mean, I know you have your imagery, but is there something that, like, when you go through a place like this, is there a trinket there, a door handle that's on the floor, something for you to take? Not in a morbid way, but just as I don't have the right word for that, but I'm just imagining myself like seeing that little knob, past that plate, just something that you could hold on to.
I've got plenty to hold on to. As far as, you know,
Okay.
these are people.
Yeah.
So no, I have pieces of missiles that that I brought back with me that from attacks that I was in. But I don't need a doorknob or a trinket
Yeah.
to remember the smells, the sounds. This is this high school in the Kharkiv region, just north of Kharkiv. And what I really found fascinating about this is this is what it looked like the day before the Russian invasion. So these school children, this is part of the PE room or the gymnasium, and you have backpacks that are still hanging up. You have gym shoes that are still lined up on the same bench that a kid sat down on the 23rd of February. And this is what it looks like today. And you know, when you're moving around places like this or in these apartments, a lot of these places are also still mined. There are these small little butterfly mines that are being put into kids' toys, musical instruments, bodies. So for me, what I had to kind of learn really quickly is just how I maneuvered through an environment like this, and just to be cautious of where I stepped. And for me, like the inclination, my first thing I want to do is I want to reach out and grab something. And so I wasn't able to do that. And because people are dying by picking stuff up these days. This is in a school in Hostomel. So this is, if people are familiar with Maria, the big plane, this is the Hostomel Airport is located right behind the school. You can actually see the hangar from these windows. So this is where it all started. This is where Chechen special forces and Russian special forces entered the Kyiv region and started the assault on Kyiv. This is called Military Town, and this sign essentially in translation says that they're sorry, that they'll fix it. And then the V is just one of the other symbols of Russia marking their territory.
And Patrick, do you speak Russian or Ukrainian at all?
I can understand Ukrainian. I can read, and I can speak a little bit, but I'm not fluent. I know enough to get by. And for me, you know, one of the things that like abandonment of place and space, and you know, like the entire world, you know, Ukraine just rolled out of COVID, and so I constantly think about the impact that war has on education and on the educational infrastructure and So this is a classroom in Eastern Ukraine that was under occupation. So for me, this on its own, like, it's not the greatest image. For me, it metaphorically, it meant a lot to have these dried up, wilted, decomposing flowers on the wall. That this is in a school classroom in occupied Eastern Ukraine. That these flowers just continued to decompose, and the one on the right almost started to become part of the wall as well. This is the Kherson region outside of Berislav. And so we hear every day on the news about it's farming season right now in these fields. Farmers are still running their plows, and farmers are still dying every single day trying to get crops in. This is the glove from a Russian tank driver. So once again, I'm really interested in the small artifacts of war, images that can spark conversation about what war does. This is the Chernihiv, north of Kyiv. And then that also brings into question what's the value and purpose of art in war, right? So this is a Banksy mural that was in military town in Hostomel. Ironically, this mural was also cut out of the wall and stolen, or they attempted to steal it. And at that point, Ukraine started to put measures in to protect all of Banksy's murals that he had put up in Ukraine. And one of the, in military town, this is a place that I've spent plenty of time here. And one of the complaints from the people who live here is that this mural drew so many people to come and look at this, but they were only willing to view this mural and leave. They wouldn't go past the first street that this was located on. They weren't bringing supplies or humanitarian aid to help the people who still lived here. And so there were mixed feelings on Banksy's work. And so on one side, it does draw attention to what's happening in Ukraine and in these particular communities that need help. On the other hand, it brings in a lot of people who are just going there to look at this and take selfies in front of it. Not understanding that, this is a person's home. People died here. People were buried in their front yards in this apartment block. So I think there's always been that question, what's the value and purpose of art during war? And like Galina, this is Anya, and she was born into war as well. And she was born into occupation, just like Galina was. So in my mind, when I look at Galina, I look at Anna the same way. I see Anna and Galina. So far, their entry to this world has started the same way. Started with war, started with occupation, Thank you, guys.
Wow. That's incredibly powerful. I have to tell you, you're really a terrific presenter. The sensitivity that you bring to those images and sharing your intimate feelings with us is really wonderful. Really, it makes for a very moving presentation. Yeah, so we can unmute everybody, and if anyone has any questions, just jump in. So that was yeah, wow. But yeah, Patrick, if you want, you could stop sharing. We still have your screen up, I think. Yeah.
I'm trying to stop sharing, but it's not letting me. Oh, there it goes.
All right. Great. There you go. So Patrick, what are the plans for you? When do you think you're going back? Are you going back? You know what? How does that work for you?
No, I'm in New Hampshire now. I'm with my family, and my responsibility now is to be here with my family and to share the stories that people shared with me, right? So I'll focus on setting up different lectures and gallery exhibitions. I'll start to slowly work on submitting editorially, but my time in Ukraine being on the ground is I think it's complete.
Yeah, and what do you do to decompose when you come back? Because obviously this affects you deeply. That comes clearly in your presentation. What's your mechanism to make yourself right?
I don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, I don't think you ever successfully do that. I think the want to return is always there, and I think that's kind of, you see that in people who come from military service. It's easier to go back. For me, the last 6 weeks were incredibly challenging in the aspect that for most of my time there, I've been under direct, artillery fire from Russian soldiers. I've been in drone and missile attacks. But when you're when that comes to your home, and it's where you can't escape it. The last 6 weeks have been that in Kiev, and I think that's going to continue. For most of the month of May, I did not sleep. Slept in my clothes, just because the attacks and the explosions kept getting closer and closer to where I lay my head. Apartments next to me catching fire, feeling the blast shockwaves. Like, so I don't think people don't fully
comprehend.
I won't there's no way you can be the same person.
Right. And I mean, so your family obviously plays a huge part in getting back to some sense of normalcy, right? I would imagine.
Absolutely.
So,
were you embedded? Were you embedded with any kind of type of battalion or squad, or how was your agreement with the Ukrainian authorities?
So I have Ukrainian military accreditation, so that allows me to work within a certain area. They started to change that recently. They started to make it more difficult for press to access even liberated areas that are not under direct daily fire. But I would pick a place where I would want to go, and that's kind of where I would go. So no, I wasn't embedded with any military battalions.
Most part independent on your own.
Correct.
So, Patrick, I have a question for you. Keith and I obviously a lot of praying for you when you're over there with your family. But have you thought about when the war's over, going back and following up with the people that you met and the people you photographed with?
I think that will, you know, I think with technology, you can always stay connected. So just as I've stayed connected to people that I was with on my first trip, I haven't even started to think about, you know, when the war will end. I think it's going to be we have a long time before the war ends, unfortunately.
You know, something beautiful that Lisa Muir wrote. I met Patrick when he reached out about fundraising in New Hampshire for Ukraine. I left that quiet conversation saying to myself, he's a camera poet. I'm reminded tonight of that term I coined. Poets tell us the story of humanity through images we create in our hearts from words. Patrick is doing that both through his photographs and his beautiful words. Thank you, Patrick, for the gift of these stories. How beautiful. That's Lisa Muir. Absolutely beautiful. And
Thank you, Patrick.
yeah, you can't say anything more than that. That's really beautiful, Lisa. Thank you.
Patrick, thank you very much. I was trying to get a closer look. First of all, everything that Lisa said, ×3, fantastic. I happen to be Ukrainian. My mother sitting next to me actually came to the United States in 1949 as one of the other small children that left during that war. So watching everything that's going on, obviously, is a sad reminder to what she went through as a small child with her family.
Mhm.
But I was trying to read at one point, I don't know if you could see, I was squinting the sign in the classroom.
Mhm.
And I think when it's hard to tell because one of the words there is kind of obstructed by the furniture. But, you know, I did see the first word, privyet, and then prosite nas, you know, forgive us. The word that I thought said that was written there was zastavili nas, which actually means they forced us.
They did, yes.
Yes, I just wanted, because I don't know if we got that last part in the translation there, but yeah, that was a.
Correct, yeah. So that is correct. It said that they forced us.
Which is interesting because I'm surprised that they would have written that.
Well, I mean, I you know, it's at that same school, Russian snipers would dry fire on Ukrainian residents of Military Town, that same community. It's a small community, you know, you're talking like maybe 9 apartment blocks in a school and a couple little stores, and everyone knows each other. And so they would, Russian soldiers would line up people living in Military Town, and they would dry fire their rifles on them. And so when I see messages like that, I don't want those messages to, for those people who haven't been there, or for those people who don't have an understanding of the history between the relationship between Ukraine and Russia, that those messages mean nothing to me. And to some that might sound harsh or ignorant on my part, but from what I've seen and the stories that I've heard, that message means that message doesn't land on me in a way that provides me with forgiveness.
Absolutely agree. Couldn't have said it better.
Very grounding. Very, very grounding. So anyone else have any questions or comments for Patrick? So Patrick, you have children?
I do.
Great. So that's a grounding experience, right?
Absolutely. Yeah. It's good to be back. It's good to be grounded. It just takes a little bit of time to work through it.
Yeah, I'm sure. Well, Patrick, one thing I always say, we want you to come back if you have, news stories, something you want to share. Another presentation, our platform is always open for you to come back. You ever think of putting a book together or anything like that, Patrick? I mean, is that something you think about?
Certainly. Yeah, absolutely. I'm still stuck in sequencing.
There you go. Yeah, if you need help on that, I'd love to help you.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah. So, Patrick, thank you. And if you could just close us out tonight, that would be great. With any, final word, final wisdom. We're hanging on every word that you say, Patrick.
Slava Ukraini.
All right, and now,
Heroям slava.
okay.
Amen to that.
Patrick, thank you so much. I want to thank everybody for coming in. And again, for folks who, have been covering the war or, would like to present, just reach out, we'd love to have you. But Patrick, I cannot thank you enough for coming in and doing this and being really a wonderful presenter. You really centered us and humbled us and, brought a beautiful presentation to us. So we thank you very, very much. And,
Thank you for having me.
So impactful.
yeah, and we will, we'll see you around the road and be safe. Always be safe. All of us. Okay. Thanks, Patrick.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thanks, Lisa.
Thank you.
Night.
Good night. Hey, Sam. Yeah. Novak, Claudio, and Jason. Jamie, we'll see you soon. Thanks, everyone. Really